truth universally acknowledged that a zombie in possession of brains must be in want of more brains. Never was this truth more plain than during the recent attacks at Netherfield Park, in which a household of 18 was slaughtered and consumed by a horde of the living dead. Hello my lovely friends, it's Margaret, and I am here with another episode of Read the Book, the series where I read the book and watch the movie, compare the two, and then we talk about it. Today's episode is going to be focusing completely on Pride and Prejudice and Zombies by Jane Austen and Seth Grahame-Smith. This should be a fun one. And a short one. I don't have much to say about this. There will be spoilers for both the book and the movie. If you don't care about those or you're trying to figure out whether or not you actually want to read this book, keep watching. But if you do care about them, you might want to click out on this one. However, if you have read Howl's Moving Castle, you should check that episode out. So you know how usually when you're talking about a book to movie adaptation, you're like, the book was better, just was. That is not the case with this one. The movie is actually much better than the book for reasons that I'm going to get into later. So if you're ready for the tea to be spilled. For those of you that do not know what Pride and Prejudice is about, the original work is about Elizabeth Bennet. She is one of 5 sisters with a mother who is bent on getting all of them married because the estate that they live on is entailed away to a distant relation. So if they don't get any husbands, they will have nowhere to live. In the beginning of the book, a rich young gentleman moves into a nearby mansion, Netherfield Park. He has £5,000 a year. So Mrs. Bennet sets her eyes on this young man for her daughters. Now, what they don't know is that he comes with his very grumpy friend, Fitzwilliam Darcy. I would also be a very grumpy person and very socially awkward if my first name was Fitzwilliam. I'm just gonna put that out there, okay? In the course of things, basically, Lizzie and Darcy clash in an epic and dramatic way. So all of that to say that Pride and Prejudice in Zombies is what happens when someone thinks that Pride and Prejudice is boring and decides they're just gonna throw zombies in there. One of the first things that I wanna talk about is the way that they went about adapting the original source material. So basically, like I said, this is just like, he got bored, and so it butchered the original stories in parts. Like, Darcy and Elizabeth are both so bloodthirsty, and they're still bloodthirsty in the movie, but that's not like all they are. But in this, like, there are just some places where it's like, what? When I read this the first time, this is my second time reading it, and it's actually gone down in rating. I will tell you there's so much problematic material in here. So much misogyny and like cultural appropriation and racial stereotypes, especially involving East Asian cultures. Part of that is historically accurate because a huge part of the culture back then was just to take stuff from like the East Asian countries, from China, Japan. I don't know if they went into the Koreas in actual history, but here it's just China and Japan, and like to steal all of that and take it back. Like they literally moved a temple from Kyoto to whatever the heck Lady Catherine's mansion place is called. Hey y'all, Editing Margaret here. I just wanted to kind of clarify that the reason that I mentioned the historical accuracy is not because I think historical accuracy excuses what happens in the book, but I feel like my issue was that yes, it was historically accurate, but for a novel that, with parts written in the modern day, it didn't engage meaningfully with the misogyny and the cultural appropriation of the time period. I think that there were ways that he could have subverted some of that, and he didn't. And so that was my issue with it, and that's why I bring up the historical accuracy. I'm not just saying like, hey, it's historically accurate, so it's okay, because it's not. Like, we have to look at things through a different lens when we are writing about historical periods in the modern day. Katie Lumsden from Books and Things has a really good video on examining problematic behavior in historical texts, and I'm going to link that down below. There's a lot in here that just was not my cup of tea, and I didn't notice it the first time I read it, so I rated it higher the first time I read it. Like, this sticks very much to the book. It's the book with zombie scenes inserted, whereas like they took a lot of liberties with the plot in the movie, and so you end up with an overall better storyline. You get to see the Netherfield attack and what happens there and how that went down. You get to get some of the backstory behind how the zombies came about, and like they do it in such an interesting and engaging way. They use like almost a puppet show, I guess is what it would be, to tell the story of how like the zombie plague hit England. And go into a little bit of Lady Catherine de Bourgh's backstory. She's one of the most interesting characters. So you got a lot more backstory and reasoning behind everything that's leading up to the beginning of the story. And then they took the story and they added in this entire subplot of like a zombie invasion. Like the zombies in the movie are smart and some of them can think. And so that actually ends up affecting Wickham's fate and Lydia's fate, because in the book oh yeah, I forgot that there was a whole bunch of ableism there at the end too. That was fun. But in the book, he ends up paying for his crimes against Lydia Bennet, but they still end up married and moving off to Ireland. And in the book, he actually ends up becoming a zombie, which he blames Darcy for, of course, naturally. And so he is the zombie antichrist, leading the zombie horde against the rest of humanity, which is an interesting and fascinating storyline. Like, that was so much more interesting to me than just like a story that was much better on its own plus zombies. One of the things that the movie did that the book doesn't do, like, they really play up the romance. I love it. This is why music is so beautiful, because the moments that you had Lizzie and Darcy together, they really just played up the fact that they were a destined to be battle couple, okay? I love me a battle couple. Like, the first act of the book is the normal Pride and Prejudice. Bingley arrives, you have everyone all in a flutter. They meet Bingley, there's the ball at Netherfield, there's meeting Wickham, all of that stuff that usually happens. The core of Pride and Prejudice is right there at the beginning of the movie. However, in the second half, once you get to Collins' proposal, which we'll get to Mr. Collins in a minute because I want to talk about him, but once you get to the second half of the movie, everything is much quicker, much faster, and everything is for like this purpose that is leading up to the final scenes in the movie with Lizzie and Darcy and the whole like escaping from the zombie horde and confronting Wickham. In the movie, he kidnaps Lydia and he's using her as bait to draw Darcy out. So they took what ended up being just an overdone like version. They could have gone a completely different way with that, but from Mr. Collins' proposal onward, it's a little bit different than is in the original Pride and Prejudice, which is great because in the book, Charlotte ends up becoming a zombie, and that really made me mad. Like, Charlotte did not deserve that, and the way he handled it and talked about it was really weird. The second half of the movie is just basically like focused on this zombie aristocrat uprising because they've discovered that if they eat pig's brains, they don't lose their capabilities for thought as quickly, and so they're able to actually like live normal lives. And Wickham's trying to convince like people to figure out a different solution than just killing the zombies, which, you know, he has some self-interest in that because he is a zombie, so he's not gonna want to get killed. It's a much better plot because they took this idea of, hey, there's a zombie horde, and they adapted Pride and Prejudice to fit it instead of just throwing zombies in Pride and Prejudice. That is kind of my comparison between the book and the movie. I can't say that this is my most in-depth and interesting analysis because I gave this sucker 1 star and I would like to forget about it. We have reached the part where Margaret is going to talk about some of the things she thinks the book did well and some of the things that she thinks the movie did well. I mean, keep in mind, a grain of salt, I didn't like the book at all. One of the things that the book did really well is they kept Darcy's second proposal completely the same. There's no zombies, there's no ball jokes, like there's no vomiting. Completely the same from the original. Kudos to them for that because that is one of the most just, it's very attractive, boys. It is very attractive to have someone who can admit they were wrong and then go about trying to fix that problem. The second one is the zombies do really add to the stakes and the intensity. While I was not a fan entirely of how bloodthirsty both Elizabeth and Darcy were, I think at times it just considering that it was in the Regency period, it got a little bit over the top for me. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I liked that Lizzie was a badass zombie slayer. I liked that she was very comfortable with a sword and she felt like she could take on the world. I liked that. But there were just a few times where I'm just sitting there going, that's a little out of character. The third thing that I thought they did really well was they kept Mrs. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet. Nothing about Mrs. Bennet changes, and that's great because she is hilarious as is. One of the few really good things I liked about the book is that when Collins proposes to Lizzie, Mr. Bennet is a little bit more about his girls being independent and able to take care of themselves. And he's in a little bit more of like a 21st century kind of way, but not much. But his thing, so when she refuses Collins, you know we have that epic moment where Mrs. Bennet drags Lizzie to her dad and is like, tell her to marry Mr. Collins or I will never speak to her again. And so Mr. Bennet's reply in this book is, an unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do. For I shall not have my best warrior resigned to the service of a man who is fatter than Buddha and duller than the edge of a learning sword. I missed the fat shaming the first time that I read that. The thing that I liked about his response in this is that it is about Lizzie and Lizzie's skill. He's like, you're too good for this guy. Whereas in the original Pride and Prejudice, he's like, I hate this dude. So you can't marry him. Like, it turns it on, it makes it more about Lizzie than it does about Mr. Collins. And that is the one of the few things that I actually enjoyed about this book. It might be the only thing that I actually enjoyed about this book. I tried to keep the list down to 5. So there are a lot more things about the movie that I like. So the first thing that I've already talked about, and that is that they meshed the world of Pride and Prejudice and the idea of zombies, and they really meshed them together very well. Again, like it was an interesting, like, it affected the plot in significant ways rather than just being there for interests for the gore factor. The other thing that I thought they did really well were the action sequences. I just loved how they put together and shot the zombie fights, how they handled all of that. It was very smooth. A lot of the time when you, and it helps that they were shorter action sequences, but a lot of the time when you get into action sequences and there's not like, I mean, there are things exploding and people fighting, but there's not a lot happening character and plot-wise, I get lost. And I'm just like, can we be done with this, okay? That's the 3rd explosion that I've seen in 30 seconds. I'm bored. It can make superhero movies really, really, really hard for me when you don't have a quality level of banter. They did a really good job of creating action sequences that were visually appealing and that didn't, like, you didn't get lost. It wasn't a whole big blur of stuff happening. The other thing that I thought they did really well in the movie is that they made it very feminist. In the book, there's this weird thing, like, when they get married, they're not allowed to fight anymore, and I don't understand that. In the movie, her sisters mentioned the fact that she might marry someone who will make her put away her sword, and she's like, the right man will not ask me to put away my sword. And so I really liked the fact that it was like, she can still keep fighting while still being able, like, she doesn't have to stop being a badass to be a married woman. Like, sometimes people don't get those two ideas very well. The 4th thing that I thought they did really well is they played up the romance / unresolved sexual tension between Lizzie and Darcy. I mean, it's there. It is there. And it's there in a more, because it's such a, like, off-kilter, like, not quite normal way, it's there in a way that, like, you don't get necessarily in the 2000, I mean, you get some of it in the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, but I mean, like, it is there in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies because they have a little bit more freedom in this world. They get to be a little wilder, and I did like that. It's very much played up in the first proposal scene, which is the fight scene. And oh my gosh, the way they put that fight scene together with all of the elements, good scene. That's one of the scenes in the book that was, like, kind of mediocre, but then you get to the movie and it's actually really good. The final thing that the movie did well, probably the best thing the movie did, was to cast Matt Smith as Mr. Collins. Matt Smith is, like, fantastic at playing just these utterly ridiculous, bumbling characters. Like, he is good playing just about anybody, because I've seen The Crown, I've seen Doctor Who, I've seen this. And he took Mr. Collins to this whole other level of ridiculous and awkward. I mean, he is prancing around during the dance scene, and it was, I mean, it was embarrassing. I was having secondhand embarrassment for Elizabeth, and I don't have that in the other version. He just took the Mr. Collins-ness of the character and goes, whoop, and it is fantastic, and I love it. He was probably my favorite part of the entire movie because he is just such a, even though he's playing such a ridiculous, reprehensible, annoying character, he was just such a delight to watch. He kind of makes you love Mr. Collins simply for being ridiculous and stupid. So that is it for my comparison of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies the movie versus the book. Again, I gave this 1 star. It went from 3 stars to 1 star, guys. I would give it no stars if I could. That's just the way I am. Now, we have reached the part of the episode where I tell you what the next book is going to be. But the thing about that is I recently read 2 different books that were made into movies. And so I'm going to go ahead and put a poll on Twitter. I'll have a link down below, or you can vote in my comments. I will take that into account as well. So your choices are going to be between Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief. I just recently finished rereading this for a live show that will have happened by the time this video comes out. I'm doing a read-along of the Percy Jackson series, and so we're doing a live show, and I just recently finished reading this. And so that is an option. The other option, although I haven't finished it yet, but I'm going to, is Paper Towns by John Green. Not my favorite John Green novel. It's probably my least favorite, but I really still do like it, especially since it takes place in Florida. And so, like, there are so many things in here that you can tell this was written by a true Floridian. I love it. It's fantastic. Those are your 2 options. Go ahead and make sure that you vote to see which one you want next. I will do whichever one gets the most votes will get made into an episode faster. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. Also, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I am at the word nerd on both of those, and don't forget that is a 3 in nerd instead of the E. That is it for now, my friends. I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!